Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election and talking about the expectations that the Biden campaign has for themselves. Now, I've always enjoyed looking at what we know about how campaigns feel about the state of their races. So, for example, in 2020, we knew Republicans did not feel good about their races because obviously in the final weeks of that campaign they were spending money defending or an incumbent senator in Montana and a seat that they held in Kansas and traditionally red states. And it was no secret that all summer long GOP internal polls had Donald Trump trailing Joe Biden often by double digits across most battleground states. So in 2020, one of the reasons I was most sure Trump was going to lose was that his own campaign in the Republican Party itself did not give off confidence. And in 2022, we kind of got some mixed vibes. We got Democrats, having some internal panic, but in the final months of that campaign, especially after the Dobbs decision, we got, reports of internal polls showing closer races than were expected, and ultimately Democrats did overperform. And then this year, it is the complete opposite. The Trump campaign, very confident. Republican staffers in D.C., very, very confident. The Biden campaign, full free fall. It's been 13 or 14 days since that debate, I believe, and Democrats spent, I'd say, 10 or 11 of those days debating whether or not they should replace Biden. They're not going to. I think that if it was going to happen, it would have happened by now, or would be clearly happening as we speak, but it's not happening. Not enough Democrats have come forward, and Biden has had about as bad a 2 weeks as it gets, and I don't know anyone who is not convinced yet that would be convinced by something else in the near future. So Biden's going to be the nominee, and Democrats are not happy about that. So let's talk about the internal polls. I actually already made a video that kind of discussed these polls. We're going to talk more in depth about what they mean for the election as a whole. And by election, I don't just mean the presidential election. I mean the House elections and the Senate elections. So it's all very important. Let's get into it. So I filled out a map here, and it kind of labels the states that at this point are likely to go to one candidate. So I've included states like North Carolina in the Trump column because at this point it does not seem likely Biden has a chance to win North Carolina. But in the other blank states, we have kind of a mix. We have traditional swing states like maybe, Georgia or Wisconsin or Nevada. Then we have states that would typically be in the blue column like Colorado or Virginia. So it's going to be interesting. But let's go to the polling that we have. So again, I already talked about these polls, I believe, last week. But we're going to focus on the upper half of this list. So Colorado and Minnesota, as well as Maine, they're still in the Biden column. It's very close, and I'm just going to put it. That's another tweet that I was going to reference at a later point in this video, but we can talk about it in a second here. But to go back to the map here, Colorado, I'm just going to put them in the lean column. Colorado and Maine would both be tilting towards Biden at this point. And then Minnesota's the other one. Minnesota, he's up by 0.4. So these are states where Biden, even in his, even in those internal polls, is leading. But that shouldn't take away from the fact that these states should not be close. In any election where the Democrats or where the Democratic candidate has even a 50% chance of winning, these states should not be realistically on the board. They should not be on the board. Minnesota was the closest of these states in 2020, voted for Biden by 7.2%. Maine voted for Biden by 9%, Colorado by over 13%, I believe. So these are states that are left trending. Again, Minnesota and Maine were especially close in 2016, but they were not close in 2020. So they all moved towards Biden in 2020. In 2022, Democrats didn't struggle in any of these states. They won both Colorado races by double digits. The only competitive House race in Maine that we saw was in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and Democrats won it by a lot more than people were expecting, but a 5-point margin. And then in Maine, we saw a governor's race where the former GOP governor ran against the incumbent Democrat, and the incumbent Democrat won by double digits as well. So none of these states really had any warning signs for Democrats in 2022, but we do know that at this point, the internal polls have them close. The Biden campaign themselves, they think these states are competitive. They think, even in the case of Minnesota and Maine, that it's under half a point is how much they're ahead by. So literally a toss-up. Now, do I think Minnesota's a toss-up? Do I think Maine's a toss-up? No, I think Biden's still clearly favored in both those states. But it is close, and that is not good. Like I said, in even a 50-50 campaign, let alone a campaign Democrats are winning, these states are not on the board. But because of Biden's fundamental unpopularity, because of the fact he has a 36% approval rating, he's losing in Minnesota. Or he's barely ahead in Minnesota, and he's losing in the rest of these states. Excuse me. So those are the states that are still in his column. But let's talk about some other states because it gets worse. In New Mexico, down by half a point. Virginia, down by 0.6. In New Hampshire, he's barely within the margin of error. He's down by 2.8. So we're going to fill those out now, put them all in the lean column just to kind of characterize them similarly. And the rest of these states, they're not really that close either. Trump's winning all of them. So that would be the electoral map. But again, we're going to focus on the states that are in the lighter shades here, and then talk about them and the impact they have on this election. Because again, all of these states, both the light blue ones and the light red ones, they voted for Biden in 2020. And none of them were that close. The closest was Minnesota, 7.2% margin of victory for Biden. Still not all that close. So Biden is fundamentally unpopular. Again, I just said the 36% approval rating number. That is incriminating. And then you also have to remember that when you look at this electoral map, these states add up to make a pretty considerable portion of electoral votes. If we take them out here for a second, that is 44 electoral votes. And so let's say Biden miraculously were to, if these states were uncalled, win Michigan, win Pennsylvania, win Wisconsin. That would usually be enough for him to win the election. But he's not even close here. Georgia, not close. Arizona, Nevada gets closer, but he needs these states. There is really no world unless he, can win North Carolina. But at that point, you're kind of getting into, some really odd, I would say, scenarios where he wins North Carolina but loses Virginia, for example. But again, look, here's the thing. Biden needs these states, and they add up to be 44 electoral votes that are very important for him. And he won them all in 2020. But again, his own internal polling has them close. So what does that say? They don't think they're going to win. And I kind of danced around it for the first 2 minutes of this video, but Biden doesn't think he's going to win. His campaign doesn't think he's going to win. And that's a problem because when you truly believe you can't win, you start playing damage control. You start playing for pride. And when we look at how that, kind of has worked throughout history, it doesn't really bode well. In 2020, the Republicans, were very public, or I shouldn't say public. That's the wrong characterization of the situation. But they were not, it was no secret, not even in D.C., but throughout the entirety of the political community, it was no secret that the Republicans knew and were fully counting on losing the House in 2020. In fact, they were counting on losing seats. They already, had been swept out of majority in the 2018 midterms, and they're counting on losing another dozen seats. And so, they played damage control. Instead of actually fighting in 50-50 districts and trying to, carve a path to the majority, they were like, look, let's not make this any worse than it needs to be. Let's just try to hold on to our red districts. And so what happened was Republicans actually did really well. They held on to all the red districts. They won most of the toss-up districts, but they fell just a few seats short of the majority. They were, I believe, five seats short of winning a majority. If 5 seats had gone their way, they would have won the House majority. So the lesson that I think you can take away from House Republicans in 2020 was that if they were just, even 10% more aggressive and they spent money in seats that they thought were going blue that were actually competitive, they could have easily won the House majority. Definitely could have happened. And so what does that mean for Biden's campaign? Well, look, maybe they're not going to lose New Mexico. If their own internal polls have caught on to this and they actually campaign there and they spend money, they're not going to lose New Mexico. But New Mexico doesn't really, Biden winning New Mexico isn't, a significant factor in deciding the election results. Biden will win the election. If Biden wins the election, he'll win New Mexico. But if you lose the election, he could still very well win New Mexico, right? Like New Mexico does not have a substantial impact on its own on the election results. Obviously, if it votes for Trump somehow, then Biden will not have a good night. But in all likelihood, it'll vote for Biden. But that doesn't tell us a whole lot about how the rest of the election is going to unfold. But again, if Biden's own internal polls have him tied there, and they think, look, we have to spend money here to win it because it would be really embarrassing if we lost New Mexico and whatnot, then that effectively, really, really handicaps them. Because for every minute they're spending in New Mexico, they could be spending a minute in Michigan or Pennsylvania, which are states that are actually competitive, that if Biden were to win them, it would actually hurt Trump's chances of getting to the White House. But instead, if they're spending time in New Mexico, spending time in Colorado, Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire, Maine, what are they projecting? Clearly that they can't win, and clearly that they're kind of handicapping themselves. Like I said, instead of, going to New Mexico, they'd be going to Michigan or Pennsylvania. And so what does that do? That puts Trump in a position where he can go on offense. He can go, uninterrupted in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, while Biden is in New Mexico or Minnesota, states that he won by 9 points and 7 points respectively in 2020. This is a problem for the Democrats. I really think that they need to stem the bleeding. Again, I wrote an article, and I'll post on my community tab when I release this video for all interested. On my Substack, I wrote this article, and I talked about how, Biden could in theory win, but the energy we get from his campaign right now is terrible. And this is not the mark of winning campaign. It's just not. It just does not seem like a campaign that thinks that they're going to win or that they're even close to winning right now. So, just let me know what you think. Let me know what you expect. Let me know if you think the Biden campaign is handling this right. I think that this has been horrible for them because, again, they're not protecting confidence and they're in free fall. They look disorganized, they look divided, and they just don't look like a campaign that is, 4 months and counting away from victory. So feel free to comment down suggestions for future videos. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.